Hey guys, good evening. We have a new friend joining in today on WurkTV platform. Late night show for us, but Dr. Ranjini is from the US, so it's early morning for them. So thanks a lot, Ranjini, for joining in. One of the reasons she is very different and she is one of the unique guests we have on the show is because she is by professional biochemist or my molecular biologist, and but she is very passionate about art, music, and she's actually started an NGO which is called SciArtsRUs. Okay,
All right. Yeah.
Sci Arts are
All
us. Okay,
yes.
so it's basically it's science, art, and us. She basically is promoting sciences, arts, and music via educational opportunities. She does live concerts, seminars, and webinars, and lecture demonstrations. This is how she is engaging the community, Indian community out there, to ensure that they are glued to our cultures, they know our culture, and the culture is still existing out there and it's not dying down. It is very important that we have such personalities out there, who are ensuring that our traditions are not dying. And I've gone through a couple of posts, couple of shares on your platform, both on your website on and on your Facebook page. So it is very important. Some of these kids drive some of these things. I recently got a couple of years back. I saw Manabadi, which was like organized by Silicon Andhra out there,
Mm.
and they drive similar activity out there. What you're doing is really great. So thanks a lot, Ranjini, for joining in. Uh, how did this start? From a background of being a microbiologist, uh, you know, हमारे मतलब in during our days, our labs we could only smell. We never had music playing in our labs. It was pretty serious profession, and all the friends who took science as their profession were more like very serious, very studious with specs, always towards book. They never had interest of music or art. So how did you land up in this particular passion, and how is it going? How was the journey so far? And doing it in the US, was it tough? Was it easy? And what's the current engagement? So these are the questions I have in mind.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank both you, Raviji, and WurkTV for inviting me to be a part of this show. It's indeed an honor. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And also thanks to all the audience that's tuned in. So yeah, to answer your question, I think, a little bit of my background, would be helpful. And yes, you're right. I am a scientist by training. So I've lived in the US for about 20 plus years, actually. And I came here to go to graduate school. So I actually did my PhD in biochemistry. Prior to that, I grew up in India. I went to school and college over there. And I was always passionate about science. It was something I knew I would be into. And so while I was growing up, I was also very interested in art. But for whatever reason, a lot of my focus was more in the sciences. And so then I came here, did my PhD, and I felt like, the art piece was still missing. I do paint and sketch in my free time, and I always felt like, as a scientist, when a non-scientist asks you, to explain a scientific concept, and I go down into the details of the science, I invariably lose them. They're like, what? So I almost felt like, even right at the beginning, like when I was in graduate school, there was a friend of mine who knew, that I would paint and sketch. And she was like, why don't you try to integrate science and art together? Like, a lot of the proteins and viruses, in biology are actually quite symmetrical. They're very artistic if you actually think about it. So she was talking to me about how I could make illustrations of, microorganisms in an artistic way. And as you know, all our scientific textbooks have illustrations that are, drawings and, this color and picture speaks a thousand words. So I always felt, there was a part of me that was very intrigued by the artistic aspect of science. And also another sort of uniting thing between science and art is both of them sort of challenge the status quo. You know, you're always trying to express yourself in a different way, and you're very creative. Both science and art requires you to be creative. So I've continued, making more strides in the scientific arena. I didn't have a lot of time to focus on the art. So long story short, fast forward, finished my graduate school, and then I started working for a biotechnology company in Thousand Oaks, which is like a city north of Los Angeles. So, kept working for the last like 15 years. I was at Amgen, which is a biotechnology company. And, and then I got married, had children. I have a couple of kids. I have an 11-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. And so both of them started learning music. And especially my son is very into music, and he started learning Indian classical music, Carnatic music, and he also learns Western classical. So when, I started investing a lot of time with him on music, sort of my passion for art and music reignited. And I kind of felt like, okay, we need to do something to keep this alive. And now I've again started learning music, but, more, sort of fun to be in touch. But one of the things, and I think you might be familiar with, whether it's in the sciences or the arts, in order to promote science and arts and give a platform to people, is always challenging. And the challenge comes from either, no resources being available for doing that, or not an audience available, or finding different ways to simplify it. So, for instance, right, so science in itself, and like I said, if I start talking about science to somebody, about say what I was doing as a scientist at Amgen, most people would just tune out. So I realized I would need to package it differently in order to make somebody understand. So if my 10-year-old came and asked me, okay, mom, what are you doing at work? I had to distill it down to a way that he would appreciate it. So that kind of got me thinking, so that maybe we need to make it more accessible and easier to digest. And being in the US, in our milieu, learning, Indian classical music or anything Indian, our cultural, uh, any of our culture, we want to not just keep it within our Indian, audience. We want to make it more accessible to everyone else who are non-Indians. So one thing I realized is whether it's my colleagues or my kids' friends, they would all be very interested, provided we package it in a way that's more palatable. And so between the fact that we needed to provide a platform and make science and arts more accessible, not just to an Indian audience and not just to people who are able to, have the ability to educate themselves in the sciences or the arts, but also to leverage our children. A lot of our kids who are very smart, they have a tendency to grow up very entitled. So we felt like, as a family, my husband and I, we thought that maybe it's better to leave a legacy, not just for our children, but other children, where we try to get children to give back to the community by actually teaching, or either tutoring or teaching, whether it's academics like science or math, or art, music, or visual art or performing arts. So we want to create a platform where we get children who are smart or talented to be able to give back to maybe other children who are not so fortunate, and do it for free. And in fact, one of my efforts is to try to make this like a program within our school districts. So that way children feel motivated to do it. There's a program where children can volunteer on their own to do this. And when they do that, they get rewarded for doing it. So my effort right now is to try to see how we can bridge the gaps that are there within our existing school district to complement what's missing in the scientific and art area, if that makes sense. I mean, and I can go a little more into detail about what this
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
except.
For a layman, like somebody who's new to this, how do we explain? What how easy would it be for a person like me? I'm not into art. I'm not into music. So if I join, what are the things? How is it different? Is it easy for me to understand and learn, or is it quick for me to learn? What are the value additions I will have through this particular methodology of learning?
So, I mean, this is not more around the, methodology of learning. Although it could be considered to be that way, because so the way I'm thinking about it is I want to introduce science and art slash music within our school districts in a way that is more accessible. So, for example, like we want to introduce it as an after school activity. Not just so most Indian families actually over here, we go full on into it, right? Like we get into the depths of, classical music or dance, but oftentimes, when you start talking about this to a non-Indian in this milieu, with a non-Indian setting, we lose them, because most children want to just know. So I did this where I took my daughter to her school, and she gave a little demonstration on Bharatanatyam, and she's a second grader. She was like 7 years old, so there's not a whole lot of depth that she can actually communicate. But she made a few slides and she made the children with videos, the children and her teacher dance. So that very basic introduction to dance piqued their interest that they wanted to learn more. So I kind of feel like if we come up with programs in our school districts that simplify the way you understand like our Indian music and package it in a way that's more palatable, we can get more people interested in it. And once they really like it, obviously we have many ways to get in-depth knowledge of our art. So that's something. So somebody like you, for instance, let's say you have no exposure or to music or art, you could get started on a program like that too, rather than always going straight to private lessons and saying, okay, now let's get into the nitty gritty of this. So that's from the art perspective. From the science perspective, there's two different things. So when we talk about accessibility, this accessibility depends on what the context is, right? So we can talk about accessibility to education, depending on the demographic, or you can talk about accessibility in terms of how simple it is to understand it. So for science, for example, right now we're doing this COVID cognizance contest. So, obviously the entire world is affected by COVID, and, there's a lot of awareness, there's a lot of guidelines. But, at the dinner table, we're always talking about why is it affecting one person different from the other? What's the scientific rationale behind this? And my children participate in the conversation, but there was not a good understanding. So we said, okay, let's open this up to all the children and let them go and do some research, think about this and get excited about science. And let's get the children to come up with some guidelines and conclusions of what they made. So we now have a lot of kids who are very interested, and they went and did their research, they made presentations. And so kind of it demystified what COVID, the mechanism of COVID is, or why is it infectious? Why is it affecting people the way it does? So sort of that's kind of the idea, trying to make it a little bit more easy to understand first before we get into, the depths of the science or the art. And another aspect that I'm personally very passionate about is the interface between science and art. Like I mentioned to you in the beginning, science, like at the molecular level, is very artistic. So there's symmetry within, molecular organisms, there's symmetry within proteins, and you can actually relate it to a lot of art forms, including our Indian art forms, which is like Rangoli. Rangoli is very symmetric. And if you go and look at a lot of protein structures, they're highly three-dimensional and very symmetric. So I've always wanted to have, a symposium on something like this where art meets science. And in an art standpoint, want to make it more accessible to even people who are challenged, like this, or differently abled, like making art more accessible to the blind, or people who are not able to hear by maybe introducing Braille in art. So there's many such ideas that we want to implement. We also want to give a platform for performing arts like acting. And that's a gap which we don't have in many of our schools. So, there's many different programs that we can implement. And that's what we're trying to do.
Cool. And I agree with you. The non-Indians out there also enjoy the Indian tradition. They're very passionate about Bollywood, Bollywood
Exactly.
dance, Bollywood music.
Mhm.
Some of these, and they do come to the events, provided they have a circle. They know that there are friends out there. They do
Correct.
accompany. They do cheer kids. Who are
Hmm.
Indians, but want to come with their family and enjoy this particular event. I think that's really important too. Making it an occasion which is just not limited for Indian community, but is
Correct.
welcoming everybody involved. It's always good that they also learn about our culture, and some of these dances and arts which are like almost dying down. If they get to know about it, they are more inquisitive to learn and retain some of these arts than we are. So
That,
good,
that's right.
good idea. I think this, you know, this should really roll out in every, I think every state, out there.
Right. No, most certainly. And I think, our organization, SciArtsRUs is a relatively young one. It's barely about a year old. And we started out with a lot of gung ho. We wanted to go about implementing a lot of these, but then COVID happened. And, obviously with social distancing, it's quite challenging to be able to implement a lot of these programs, and especially with children at home doing remote learning. But we're hoping that post COVID, we can implement a lot of these. But we've been doing what we can online. I know a lot of
Hmm.
folks have been trying
Yes.
to do that. So at the moment, the focus is on providing online platforms. So going forward, we want to have an opportunity to invite people across the world, and not necessarily children, to provide scripts for performing arts like acting. And I'm not quite familiar at the moment how the schools are in India in terms of the kinds of opportunities we get. But over here, oftentimes in our schools, we don't get there's not formal programs for acting or drama or like theater, debate, or even music for that matter. You would be surprised. And also diversity is something that I think, art, especially in this side of the world, we need to embrace that a lot. And I know there's a lot of organizations like ours that are trying to do that. But an effort that, I was very passionate about is in trying to get the schools to embrace diversity as a program.
Hmm.
So it's always there. So if the school's not able to do it, then we want to come in and see if we can bring in that diversity and make everyone a little more comfortable and familiar with, other cultures. And it doesn't have to necessarily be Indian culture.
Yeah. And we do have a lot of artists right now. We have theater artists, we have magicians, and nowadays everybody is trying to do workshops online because that's the way
Exactly.
forward, at least for an year. So,
Right.
yeah, I'm
Exactly.
sure you have the right team, and have the right artists along with you. This becomes a great team. and
Exactly.
and some of
Exactly.
these organizations like Manapadi and Silicon Andhra, which have done, they've started small, but now they're spread across. The engagement, the contests they do it, the way, the seriousness that they bring in to do some of these events are just awesome. I think it's just the setting. I mean, it's just the intent, and how serious you are, and the everybody is open to doing these things. So
Absolutely. And one of the things that I hope, especially in a post-COVID era, or even currently as we speak, is to start engaging children in a big way in this process. Like our children, I know they're busy, especially like they are engaged with so many different activities. But I kind of feel like if we can leverage their skills, at least the children that are in a position to educate or in a position to give back, if we can do that in a very formal way, that will be an easy resource, an easy way to make it a little bit more accessible. Because children do relate better to children sometimes, but there is an obstacle, because most parents would want an adult teaching their children, right? But then when you're learning the arts, it's quite expensive. It's quite an expensive endeavor in terms of paying, tuition or continuing to do it for decades. So if we can engage children to give back for free, it'll not only give them some meaning and some purpose to their existence and also build their self-esteem. It'll also help them, um, you know, make leaders from other children who actually need that kind of assistance. So that's definitely one of the things that we're working on for the future. Currently, we have the COVID Cognizance Contest going on. We did a couple of musical events earlier as part of the World Music Day. We invited a lot of artists across the board to contribute their musical videos, and that was a really good success. But in a COVID era, there's only so much one can do, and the online engagement is great. But I think the face-to-face, actually meeting people, that's going to make a bigger difference in scaling up this effort. So I'm waiting for that to happen.
I've seen your team. So the other two members apart from you are, your husband and your son.
Yes.
So your
So
son is also creating the
yes,
next generation successor for this particular
yes.
organization.
And so at the moment we actually have one more person on our team. He just joined us, but yes. So my husband is an integral part of the organization. He is also a scientist by training, but he plays the guitar. He is also into art. But once you become a scientist, you usually don't have a lot of time to spend on your artistic interests. My son, like I mentioned to you, he learns music in Indian and Western classical music, both vocal and instrumental, and he's very passionate, and he's already performing and things like that. So he is always asking for things to do, and he has a tendency to not understand, how to give back to the community. So since we knew that we would find him teaching his sister all the time, either it's music or academic. So we said, why don't we leverage this and have him do a little bit more of this? So he's integral to our team, although he's only 11. But recently, we are very honored to have Professor Abhiman Kaushal, who is actually a professor at the UCLA Ethnomusicology Department.
Okay.
He's actually a percussionist, a tabla player. He's joined our team. So we are very excited. We're actually growing our team in the sciences and arts and music, and that's an ongoing process, and we are hoping to have more members added.
Super, super, Jay. So, Ranjini, we also have some rapid fire questions so that we get to know you well. So, are you all set?
I hope so.
So, when was the last time you've created a very nice event which you felt which is very close to your heart?
um, I think the last time was probably last year. And actually the one that I created very close to my heart was in March of this year, which didn't happen because of COVID. But this was just an event in our home during Navratri, where we had a lot of our friends over. So yes, that was close to my heart because it was personal. It was not so much, out there for the public.
Okay. Uh, who's your oldest friend, and where did you meet him?
My oldest friend actually is a girl called Hamsa. She's my childhood friend. She's actually in Texas right now. I hope she's tuning in and listening. But I met her. She was my neighbor next door, and we went to school together for about 4 to 5 years, and then we kind of went out of touch. We're back in touch now. So yes.
When Ranjini is, doing a stage performance or organizing a stage performance, and then Ranjini enters the stage to introduce the event, what intro music should be played in the background?
That's an interesting question. I've always been like a fan of Enya, new age music, because of the fact that It's not very loud and it's not very sad. It's right in between. So one of Enya's selections would be something I would love to have in the background.
I should try that. How is it spelled? Enmia.
Enya.
Enya.
She's
Okay, I'll try that.
sure.
So what do you do to improve your mood?
I listen to music. I usually invariably go for a walk and listen to music. That really, you know, changes things up for me.
Scientists generally know everything, right? So you know how things work. You are like, oh, fever, I know how to deal with it and stuff like that. Pretty confident on, how human beings work. The body works, how things work. But what is the silliest fear you have?
That's an interesting question. The silliest fear would be that, I get sick and I don't understand the mechanism, because every time anybody gets sick, I'm always thinking about it mechanistically and scientifically, because I feel once I can explain something scientifically, I can conquer the disease. So if I'm not able to explain it, something like COVID, for example, I think that would be my biggest fear, because I don't still understand how this virus works.
So so the best room or the location in your house, which is very favorite, and that's where we find Ranjini more.
um, would have to be the backyard. I end up being outside, like I said, every time I need to like de-stress, I go outside. So my backyard is sort of my haven.
So you moved from India for like almost 20 years back, right? So what smell brings back your memories, which are connections to India? Every time you smell that particular object, which is available here in US, but that smell brings back some memories, connects to India.
I mean, there's many different ones, but one of the things that come to my mind right at the beginning is curry pata,
Correct.
curry leaves. I actually have a nice big curry leaf tree in my house.
Oh my god.
It always reminds me of India, but yeah, for whatever reason, curry pata smell immediately takes me right back to India, to my home that I grew up in.
What changed in the way we saw TV in India when you were in your college or in your teens versus the way we
Mhm.
see now? What changed?
You mean on television?
Hmm.
So to me, it's the content. Obviously, there's a lot of change in television, but one thing that I find very amusing, and I think I was talking about this with somebody just a few days ago, is how the internet and the television have kind of merged now. um, you know, we can do everything that the television does on our phone. And it's interesting, I was asking this friend of mine who's in media, I was asking him, what does he see the future of television being? And he said that it's hard to know what the future is, because the television is now essentially the internet. So I think I mean, obviously we all know that, but to me, that's the biggest change between when I was growing up. Like, our computer is our television. So
Uh, yeah, it's quite surprising that the device
it's
is
kind
now used for something else now. So
of right.
so
Yeah.
most
Obviously, there's a lot of content that's completely different these days. I mean, the accessibility to content has changed. But yeah, simplistically speaking, I always wonder whether we'll be leaving TV channels behind in the current, era.
Yeah. When things were coming up, even I was like told that you can see it at your own convenience. I mean that was the idea of OTT or the streaming, etc. But it looks
Right.
like so just because we have signing up for the subscription, we end up seeing more content just because
Correct.
we paid for it. We're spending more
Exactly.
time than the usual time to just to make sure that we are covering everything.
Right.
Paisa vasool sort of a
But I
activity.
know, seriously, I know. But we're all, invariably at home, we're all glued onto our own devices, and each each person's looking at content in so many different forms. And I mean, to me, that's like a radical change, right? I mean, watching TV used to be like a bonding thing, all of us sit down. And we do that now. We sit down in the evenings to watch a movie in front of the television. But invariably, if, there's all of us getting together, we all are glued to our own devices doing something, which I guess is true for any family, not just ours.
So what is the most underrated art in your perception?
That's interesting. Underrated art. Hmm. Well, this is something I've thought about promoting quite a bit. And for that, I mean, I wouldn't say underrated. I know back in India, we give it a lot of importance. So, for example, like I mentioned, Rangoli. I've always been very fascinated by Rangoli, not simply for the artistic aspect of it, because if you look at any Rangoli, there's an aspect of symmetry to it. And for me, that kind of appealed even more, like I said, in biology, actually. If you look at any macromolecule or micro, they're all symmetric. And if you get down to the molecular detail of a protein, it looks exactly like a rangoli. So, of course, in India, Rangoli is very famous. We're able to we see that every time for every festival. But I kind of feel over here, there's all kind of graffiti art, there's sculpture, there's modern art, but I've not seen a lot of our Rangoli art, out there being promoted and given sort of a stage, so to speak. So, yeah, so I do feel in this milieu, Rangoli is something I feel might be a little underrated.
Yeah, I agree with you. Rangoli was a early morning activity in those days.
Correct.
Nowadays, it's only limited to festivals, and until you have to create a platform or a stage for it soon. Otherwise, it will slowly die down because people
Right.
have moved to apartments. People have moved towards
Right.
paints, which are like
Mhm.
fixed. At least with a tenure of 1 or 2 years, so that they don't have to do this every morning. But
Right.
yeah, slowly it is getting limited to only festivals, and since it is limited to festivals, I'm sure people will lose practice and slowly it will die down.
Yeah, and you're right. And a lot of it actually I learned from my mother. She's not, an artist by profession or anything, but she just learned how to do Rangoli when she was young. And, I give her a book and she can just go through several of them in one shot. And for me, I still find it very challenging. And I mean, Rangoli, like kolam, like they say in Tamil, which is, with the dots, and you make these intricate designs in such a symmetric fashion. And I don't know how she does it. And I think that's something I want to document, at least for my sake, and then hopefully, for future generations.
Yeah, and they were so passionate. The entire street, I mean, it's called Rad Rangoli or
Right.
something. The entire street was like, in one go or one cemetery.
And actually, in Chennai, this happens in January. Actually, in Mylapore, like an entire street is cordoned off where they have this big Rangoli and Kolam festival. So to your point, it's almost like because of the fact that most people are in flats or apartments, not enough time is spent on actually putting it out there in front of your house. That you need to create a festival to do that. But having said that, that's still a good way to keep the art alive.
So the last question I have, so out
Okay.
of all the events and kids you've come across, except for your kids, which kid has really influenced or motivated you a lot, saying that okay, I should continue this because of this particular kid who has really influenced you, or you felt good. This kid has done really well.
I wouldn't be able to point to one particular kid, but I think one of the things I feel very passionately about, and we have a program coming up for this through our organization, is um, generally differently abled children that are unable to learn, whether it's the science or the arts, as quickly as the others. And so for me, when I see differently abled children make progress, that really touches my heart. And so one of the things we're trying to do now, and if you see in Facebook, as you've seen, like there's plenty of platforms now for children and adults to, showcase their talents. But I haven't quite seen too many of these showcasing children who are differently abled and their ability to do art or music. So I'm hoping that, we'll be able to do one of those in the future. And, I've met a few children who are differently abled, and they've definitely touched my heart.
Yeah.
So it's not kid in particular. Yeah.
Yeah, we did a show today, a couple of hours back, 2 hours back, with a kid. I mean, that was the first kid who had autism and has performed.
Mm-hmm.
He's got extraordinary memory, and he can, you give the year, he will tell you which day it was. And
Mm-hmm.
he can also tell when each and every Rajnikant movie was released by date
Really?
and date.
Oh, wow.
So he's got
Okay.
autism, but he is really great. So it was really great. After the show and during the show, we felt so fulfilled
Right.
because he came onto our show and then performed.
Right.
So it was
I
very
mean,
encouraging. I mean,
it's
we
inspiring.
need. I mean, we feel it's like, yeah, this is something like giving back to the society.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that.
Good. With all this experience, Dr. Rajni, what would you do if you get a chance to come back to India and you become a chief minister for a specific state? What are the areas you would focus on? What are the positive reforms you would bring in?
That's an interesting question, because a lot of the way I've kind of thought about our organization and our mission is based on our local milieu. So if we were to go back to India, I know the accessibility to the art and science may be slightly different. So one of the things I would try to focus on is on making the science and art education accessible at the grassroots level. Obviously, like I was mentioning right at the beginning, accessibility, the definition changes based on the context. So if I were to go to like a village or a place where the access to basic education is missing, then that would be something that I would focus on. But let's say if I were in a city where we have access to decent education, then I would figure out where the gaps are within our educational system. And, only because I'm a lot more into education and promoting science and art, I would like to find out what the gaps are within our school systems and try to figure out a way to complement. And I do feel that there's not enough programs still in our schools to talk about the aspect of giving back. And I may be wrong whether in Indian school setting that we have that or not. But while I was growing up, there was a lot of emphasis on giving back, but not in the way that where we involve our kids to actually build their skills and give back, as opposed to just and there's nothing wrong in giving money to people who are in need, but I think I would try to set up programs that will engage our children in a big way in giving back to the less fortunate, or to even their own peers who are not able to do what they need to do. So education, I guess, broadly speaking, would be something that I would be working on.
Good one. Good thoughts, Rajni. I think you should come back. You
Oh,
should basically spread your wings there, come back with all your expertise, and do some changes in your own capacity back here, because I clearly believe everybody who goes to other countries should bring back some value back to the country. And
right.
back at what age, what stage, that differs from person to person. But yeah, always keep that in mind. I'm sure what you're trying to do with art, I mean, you're basically doing the reverse thing. You're trying to retain Indian culture out there for Indians out there, and trying to give them a platform to showcase themselves and their art lives.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that. Hopefully someday I would come back, but I do come to India quite often, actually, except this year. And look forward to meeting with you when I do come there next time.
sure. Thanks a lot for joining in. And but I still have a question. So Would
Okay.
you be changing the way? I mean, would you suggest the labs or where you work? The scientists work in an atmosphere where it's only chemicals. The all that you can do is smell. Different chemicals and stuff like that. So, would you infuse music and make those labs much more creative with some artwork and stuff like that, or would it be the same?
Actually, it's so interesting you mentioned this. So while I was working, back in my company, prior to the my becoming my own consultant, I used to always think like, why can't we put like, you know, um, biologic art on the wall? And as far as music goes, everybody's on their headphones these days. So I think music has become quite accessible. But yes, I think putting art on the wall would be helpful. But more than that, I think what is kind of missing is we have conferences for artists and we have conferences for scientists. We never have symposiums where we bring both. Well, I wouldn't say never. There's been efforts that have been made to bring artists and scientists together, but I think we need more
Oh,
symposiums where we bring both people together so the artists can give a different perspective of the science. And I think that would add more to the creativity and change the drabness of the science a lot more. So yeah, I hope we can do that. Bring introduce more art in the labs.
thank you, Ranjini, for joining in, and it was a nice conversation. And keep up the passion, and drive art out there. And anything we can do in our capacity to, shout out, spread the word out, do let us know. We would definitely do that. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Raviji, and thanks to WurkTV for giving me an opportunity to speak about this. And we look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you. So, friends, do follow Dr. Ranjani, and follow the page of the non-profit foundation, which is driving art and culture out there. And if you're an artist, if you're passionate about theater arts, or any art which this organization is doing, and you want to connect and contribute, which can help the kids out there, do connect with Dr. Ranjani. I think this is a very good platform which can connect all the artists and the students who want to learn. So thank you, friends, for joining this late night show over here. Uh, have a great day ahead, Dr. Ranjani. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raviji, and have a good night.
Thank you.